Welcome to Novara Live, another big one for you tonight. Wes Streeting is set to resign his cabinet position tomorrow and challenge Keir Starmer. That's according to briefings to pretty much all the newspapers. Will he really take the plunge, though? And if so, who will challenge him? Will it be Keir Starmer? Will he say, I am standing strong in Parliament? Will it be Ed Miliband? Will it be Angela Rayner? Or will Andy Burnham find a way back into Parliament in time to take part? Plus, who should control the economy? Prime ministers or the bond market? I speak to an expert economist later in the show. Throughout, of course, I'll be joined by Bastani. Feels a bit Groundhog Day, but also we are getting lots of new developments all the time. And it feels like who seems the most likely next prime minister is changing quite a lot. Today, I think definitely Andy Burnham's odds are loosening. It's not loose. What's the opposite of shortening for odds? Lengthening. His odds are lengthening.
Yeah.
Wes Streeting's actually potentially shortening.
Do you think so?
Compared to yesterday, because if Wes Streeting has a contest without Andy Burnham, I still don't think he's the favourite to win, but every other candidate is much more beatable. And we're going to talk about this in detail.
This is the show, by the way.
Spoiler
alert. Also, you're saying it's Groundhog Day. Prime Minister changing is quite a big deal, right?
Very big deal. You can support us. Obviously, this show is only possible because of our kind supporters. We don't have sponsors. We don't have massive donors. We just have you guys. And you can go to novaramedia.com/support. We'll have a short clip for you today as well about our new fundraiser. I think about 60,000 of you have watched our fundraiser video on YouTube. Lots of really positive feedback. If you haven't looked at that yet, do go check it out. Nice backstage look. The highlight is clearly Alex showing everyone his fancy, very complicated computer. So if you haven't seen it, you've got to take a look. The King's Speech. That's where the monarch opens Parliament and reads out the government's legislative agenda. Would on most occasions be the biggest political news of the day. Today, though, all eyes in Westminster were on somebody else.
To resign, Health Secretary.
Yeah, go.
Are you going to resign? What are you going to say to the Prime Minister, Health Secretary?
Are you going to stand for leader? Are you going to challenge the Prime Minister?
That was Wes Streeting walking into 10 Downing Street earlier this morning to have a meeting with Keir Starmer. It didn't last long, though. This was him leaving just 16 minutes later.
Have you resigned, Mr. Streeting?
What did you say, Prime Minister?
Did you ask the Prime Minister to
Have you got the
resign?
numbers? Have you bought
Are you going to resign, Mr. Streeting?
Do you want the job or not?
We're sort of divided in the studio as to whether or not this is very undignified, having all these journalists shouting out questions they know that aren't going to be answered, and whether or not we should go and do it. So I suppose vote in the comments. Streeting had been accused of bottling a leadership challenge against Keir Starmer, but his allies have today told multiple newspapers he is planning to resign tomorrow and will launch a formal leadership campaign against Keir Starmer. This was from The Times at around 11:30 this morning. So they wrote, Wes Streeting has told allies that he is preparing to resign and trigger a leadership contest as soon as tomorrow. The Health Secretary confronted Sir Keir Starmer this morning during a meeting ahead of the King's Speech that lasted just 16 minutes. Allies of Streeting, who have spoken to him directly, said that he has made clear that he is, quote, going to go for it. They said that he is likely to resign on Thursday and mount a formal challenge for the leadership. One Streeting ally who has spoken to him said, quote, he is going to go for it. He's going tomorrow. They say discussions have also been held to prepare MPs to sign Streeting's nomination papers. That's according to one of those with knowledge of the plans. Another who has spoken to him said that claims by Starmer's allies that he has bottled it are wide of the mark, and that he made clear in private that he will make a bid for the leadership. A third senior source organising for Streeting said, quote, if Starmer's supporters think this is over, they're going to be disappointed. I'm expecting a move before the end of the week. Aaron, all the headlines this morning, Streeting is going to resign tomorrow. He's going to challenge Keir Starmer. Some of them have softened a little bit by now, but as far as I understand, nothing has changed. There are still allies of Wes Streeting who actually in the middle of the King's speech told all of these journalists that Wes Streeting was going to resign tomorrow and he is going to challenge Keir Starmer tomorrow. Do you believe it?
Michael, what is happening to this country? The King's speech is meant to be the set piece of legislation. The process of lawmaking in this country effectively is the consequence of the King's speech, because the idea is that Parliament is an expression of the Crown. They are the King's ministers, or the ministers of the Crown. It makes a mockery of the whole system. I'm a Republican, by the way, but I'm kind of shocked that more people aren't angry at this. It makes a mockery of the whole system. If you're a monarchist, I think you'd be really angry at that. But just generally, this is how we make laws, and the Labour right and the Labour Party just generally are pissing all over it. Will he go for it? I think he will. Wes, finish the job, by which I mean send Labour down to 20 MPs, which is what YouGov is presently predicting. There was, of course, that poll out in January saying that Wes Streeting as Prime Minister would have Labour down to 5 MPs and go finish the job. So maybe he is ready to go for it, by which I mean ready to go and kill the Labour Party. But on a serious note, it does seem like he's more likely to stand today than he was yesterday. There doesn't seem to be another serious, credible candidate from the right, although Al Khan's had a piece in The Statesman today. I think he's pitching really to be a member, potentially, of Streeting's cabinet, rather than vying for the top job himself. So in terms of the runners and riders from that side of the party, doesn't seem to be anybody else. Streeting's going for it. Equally, here's a question for you, because, of course, Streeting's meeting Starmer at number 10. Starmer could have had that meeting in the Houses of Parliament. Who benefits more from the optics of that meeting, Starmer or Streeting?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think it looked particularly good for either of them.
No. Well, that's why I ask.
Yeah, I can't see why Starmer would say, well, if you want to have a meeting, let's do it here in number 10 Downing Street. I imagine it was Wes Streeting that wanted that. But then why did Starmer agree to it? I think
Quite.
Wes Streeting seems to quite like the attention, right? I think having all those cameras there and everyone shouting to him, we were saying his suit actually was quite nicely cut. I think he was probably to some extent enjoying that, but it doesn't seem like he's necessarily playing his cards right. Let's look at the internal Labour Party polling, because this is, I think, really, explains why Wes Streeting might want to go sooner rather than later. So polling of Labour members from Survation and Labour List shows that Streeting will face an uphill battle to lead the party, but also that going sooner rather than later makes sense for him. So this is a Survation poll, as I say, carried out last week. Andy Burnham is very clearly the strongest candidate with 42% of first preferences. Wes would obviously prefer him out of the picture. However, when you include second and third preferences, the poll suggests both Ed Miliband and Angela Rayner would also beat Streeting. So if he's gone early in order to face Rayner or Miliband instead of Burnham, he still might lose, according to those polls. We should say, none of these polls really are foolproof, right? It's notoriously difficult to survey party members. Survation, in particular, do seem to have a bit of a pro-left bias in their polling. The reason I say that is because they suggested Rebecca Long-Bailey would beat Keir Starmer back in 2020. She ended up losing pretty much in a landslide. I think it was sort of 2/3 to a third. They also overestimated support for Lucy Powell in last year's deputy leadership election. So at the start of that contest, Survation gave Powell a 22-point lead over Bridget Phillipson, who was the candidate of the right. And by the end of the contest, her lead in their polling narrowed to 17. But in the actual results, Powell only won by 8 points. So in the end, Lucy Powell got 87,000 votes, or 54% of Phillipson's 46%. Now, if you're on the Labour right and you're looking at that, that's not overwhelming, right? That is a lot of people who were willing to vote for the right candidate then. And so if you are a Streeting supporter, you might think there is hope this time around as well. Wes Streeting might also take some heart from recent polling by a different company, YouGov, on possible outcomes in any leadership contest. These were done last September. This YouGov poll showed Streeting would be absolutely trounced by Andy Burnham. So in a head-to-head, Burnham was chosen by 74% of respondents to 19% for Streeting, so massive landslide. This poll also had Streeting losing heavily to Angela Rayner, who was preferred by 55% of respondents compared to 31% for Streeting. Interestingly, though, it suggests that Streeting might beat Ed Miliband. Very close in this poll, but that's the suggestion. So you can see there, it suggests that when this poll was done, Wes Streeting would beat Ed Miliband 47 to 44. That's a notable result, right? Especially as it seems at this point that if Wes Streeting stands, it will be Ed Miliband who is likely to be his main rival. So Stephen Swinford is political editor at The Times. This is what he wrote today. Could Ed Miliband succeed Keir Starmer? Senior figures on the soft left say Angela Rayner just isn't up to it. There are concerns she would be a complete liability. And that's before you get to the outstanding HMRC inquiry. Andy Burnham is struggling to find a seat, and even if he finds a seat, secures NEC approval and manages to win it, none of which is a given. He wouldn't be in Westminster for months. We reported today that Miliband has explicitly told cabinet colleagues that he would be prepared to stand if Streeting triggered a contest. This was denied by those close to Miliband. But ministers are today saying that it will have to be him if Streeting goes over the top. The soft left can only have one candidate, and at the moment, he is the logical choice. All the political editors have been tweeting, lots of things that their sources are telling them today. Multiple of them have tweeted that both Ed Miliband and Wes Streeting have the 81 MPs they would need to get on the ballot, though it should probably all be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt. Aaron, you can see why Wes Streeting wants to go now. Angela Rayner, damaged candidate. Doesn't seem like even her supporters really have faith in her. Ed Miliband, I think the assumption is that he probably would. Most people seem to be suggesting he would beat Wes Streeting in a leadership fight. I don't think it's obvious, though. No. This polling shows that, in one recent poll, Wes Streeting came ahead of Ed Miliband. That election to the deputy leadership was really, really close. If there is a contest and Wes Streeting can make the argument that it's, I suppose, insulting to put forward a prime minister that voters have previously rejected, I would still put money on Ed Miliband beating Wes Streeting, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion.
No, I wouldn't even put money on it. I'd say it's margin of error. I think if Streeting runs a good campaign and emphasises that precise point about Miliband having already been rejected by the electorate, which of course is brutal. To be changing PM midway through a parliament is already very difficult, but to do it to a guy who'd previously lost as somebody put to the country, you would need to have a general election really quickly. Miliband could run on that, right? He'd say, well, I'm going to come in, steady the ship, and we'll have a general election within 12 months. That nullifies it to some extent. I think what Miliband was maybe looking for was being a caretaker leader. If Starmer went, being a caretaker leader, unelected caretaker leader, just chosen by, the cabinet, to have his hand on the wheel until Burnham gets back into the party. I think that's what he wanted. And then he'd probably be the chancellor in a Burnham premiership. But no, I agree with you. Streeting has his own weaknesses, it's fair to say. But look, the nature of the Labour right is that they would emphasise Miliband's weaknesses far more than Miliband would emphasise his. And those include the fact he's never really had a proper job. He's a southerner, as is Miliband, but at least he represents a northern constituency. And of course, his close ties to not just Peter Mandelson, but also Morgan McSweeney and also Matthew Doyle, people who've all had to, I think, be expelled from the Labour Party, two of them, and McSweeney had to resign in recent months. So if it was a really brutal leadership race, maybe Miliband could do it. I don't think he does politics like that. And furthermore, if that was the case, if there was lots of bloodletting internally while the party's in government, I think that will only disadvantage Labour.
Because you can imagine, in that leadership contest, Wes Streeting versus Ed Miliband, presumably Wes Streeting is going to be making that argument. You've already been rejected once by the public. How can we make you prime minister? And if Ed Miliband wins, then Reform have such an effective attack ad, which is you've got, a senior Labour figure saying it would be offensive to the public to elect this guy, and they elected him. Yeah. There is going to be so many opportunities to get damaging stuff from that leadership contest if it gets dirty.
Two very weak candidates. And I think it would get dirty precisely because it would be so close, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's why if it was Burnham versus Streeting, probably because Streeting would know he was probably going to lose anyway. Yeah. Maybe he'd want some kind of unity cabinet job. It probably wouldn't get that dirty because it's not close. The closer it is, the nastier it's going to get. And I think Miliband Streeting would be close and it would be nasty and it would be damaging. All this is, of course, why some on the soft left have not given up hope on Burnham. Sienna Rogers at Politics Home reported this. If Wes Streeting announces his run for leadership tomorrow, the soft left say they will not turn to Angela Rayner, but stick with their plan A of Andy Burnham. Tribune exec MPs are expected to push Labour's ruling body to allow for Burnham's inclusion, even though that means allowing a whole by-election before the race begins. Their hope forced the issue to go to full NEC rather than the small officers group, where Burnham might have a better chance. And I'm told Ellie Reeves was in favour of allowing that to happen last time. Ellie Reeves, she might be the chair of the NEC, obviously Rachel Reeves' sister and also an MP. This afternoon, Caroline Wheeler from the iPaper had this update on when a seat, a Westminster seat, could become free for Burnham. So she said, new Andy Burnham allies claim the Manchester mayor is poised for a dramatic political comeback and an MP is ready to step aside for him as soon as tomorrow. Now, I was looking at sort of the time scale here. How long would it take to sort of call a by-election for Andy Burnham to be selected and then him to be elected, because he would have to become an MP before he could get the nominations. So the minimum running time for a by-election once it's called is 21 working days, which is just over 4 calendar weeks, so including the weekends, of course. That means, as well as allowing Burnham to stand in any by-election, the NEC would have to set a very long timetable for any leadership election. Now, Aaron, I suppose the issue here is if Streeting does trigger the process tomorrow, there's nothing in the Labour Party constitution which says that the leadership election has to happen within a particular period of time. The NEC, if they wanted, could say, okay, we're launching a leadership election, but you have to get your nominations by February 2027. There'd be nothing against the rules about that, but obviously doing that would be very destabilising for the party. So there's going to be discussions at the moment, factional ones as well, because obviously there's a big part of sort of the Labour right in the institutional structures that don't want Andy Burnham to stand because they want Wes Streeting to win. But of the people who are, let's say, more honest brokers who want what's best for the party, they're going to be deciding, do we get the popular guy but have a 3-month bruising contest? Or do we just say, look, it's not Andy Burnham's moment right now?
I think they have to get Burnham. I think that the best outcome here for Labour is that Starmer would basically say, I'm sticking around until the conference and then I'm going to resign. And in the meantime, you allow Burnham to get a seat. I think he would win a by-election in Greater Manchester. I don't think it'd be plain sailing. I think the Greens probably would not campaign particularly hard and allow him back in. I think the political pressure on them would be quite significant, right? If you want to stop a reform government, you will need a Labour Party led by Andy Burnham. Even then, it probably won't stop them. They certainly would still be, I suspect, the largest party. So that's the best outcome for Labour. Or Starmer goes and Miliband comes in as a caretaker and you still do the thing with Burnham for the conference.
The thing is then that you've got it's only sort of come to me during this conversation so much that the issue with the Miliband as the caretaker is that a Wes versus Ed. Wes Streeting is not going to allow that to happen. He is going to contest that. So if
it'd be chosen by cabinet.
He's chosen by cabinet, right?
Because we're talking about that he wouldn't necessarily be, as far as I understand, you don't need to be the leader of the Labour Party to be the Prime Minister. I could be wrong. Maybe there's the rule in the Labour Party. But fundamentally, if he has a majority of the cabinet and he has the confidence of a majority of the members of Parliament, he is the Prime Minister. So he would just be a caretaker PM. He wouldn't need to be the leader of the Labour Party to do that. You could even say that Keir Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party while no longer being the PM. He could just be a backbencher or something. So those two could work. But Streeting's an ambitious young boy, isn't he? He was smirking as he was going into number 10 in his petrol blue suit. Look, I don't know what he's thinking. It doesn't look very good for him at all. But the older I get, the more of this I see, Michael. It's very clear to me that these people aren't as smart as they seem to think.
I mean, the argument to the NEC has to be that I think 42% of Labour members have Andy Burnham as their first choice. I think 11% have Wes Streeting. The argument has to be that this guy clearly is who the members want. He's who the voters want.
Yeah.
He's who the MPs want.
Has that ever happened before?
The idea that let's just have a quick, it would take too long and it'd be too messy, so let's have a quick leadership election with Miliband versus Streeting. That's not going to be quick and it's not going to be pretty. I mean, even if it is quick, it's not going to be pretty because it's going to be close, as we've just said. So what they should do is say, yes, a 3-month schedule is not ideal. It's going to be a bit messy, but the alternatives are all much worse.
But it's also over the summer.
Yeah, exactly. People be away.
That's what happens normally. You lose, like in 2010, you lose your general election. I think it was in May 2010, wasn't it? And then basically July, August, you have your candidates going around the country doing their their press conferences and their rallies and their Q&As and their panels, and then it's decided at party conference. The background context, which is a bit different to 2010 because, of course, they were the opposition, is what you're going to talk about later, which is the bond market. If you're saying this, we're going to take our time and all of a sudden the cost of borrowing sort of rocket up, then there are political pressures. But in a way, maybe you want to be as calm as possible and make clear that Rachel Reeves isn't going anywhere and that Starmer is,
Well, also, if that were to happen,
consenting to all of this.
If that were to happen, all you would need, because people keep saying, well, there'll be this leadership contest, so they're going to be trying to, the argument is that they're going to be trying to bribe the members, they're going to just be sort of competing with each other who can spend the most, and that's going to spook the bond markets. If it's Burnham versus Streeting, Burnham is going to be, I think the contest will be almost like barely existing, right? Because Burnham's so clearly going to win. If there is any issue on the bond markets, which we're going to talk about later, if you're screaming at the screen saying, the bond market, why are you giving respect to the bond markets? We'll come to that. But I think they do matter. And if they get jittery or whatever, Burnham just has to give an interview, to Bloomberg TV, and say, I'm going to stick to, it won't necessarily be exactly the same fiscal rule, but I'm going to stick to this fiscal rule instead.
Just do what Rachel Reeves did and lie.
It's always an option.
Right? You just go, I am going to be a fiscally austere, prudent, macro-prudential, I think what Gordon Brown had that great phrase, macro-prudential oversight. People thought, I have no idea what he's talking about. It sounds really credible. You can borrow 2% on the markets with your gilts, 10-year gilts, 2%, that's fine. So it's a bit of a fugazi with the markets, right? You just need to sound and look credible. I think what they need to not do is scare the horses and say, public debt is fake, money's fake, it's not real, we can print off infinity money, we can double NHS spending. But, I think provided Burnham doesn't say that stuff. And this idea also, this kind of fundamentally anti-democratic idea that the candidates would be trying to buy votes by offering goodies. Look, Blair had the majority of the membership when he became the leader. Starmer won the membership when he became the leader. Cameron won the Tory membership when he became the leader. Boris Johnson became the leader with a huge mandate from Tory party members in 2019. The idea that party memberships always choose the candidate, which is completely at odds with mainstream opinion or the electorate or financial interests, it's just not true. Actually, if you look at recent history, Liz Truss and Corbyn are two examples where that happened, but it's not actually the norm. So it's a bit of a nonsense. Andy Burnham, like you said a moment ago, popular with members, popular with MPs, popular with the public. We've not had that from a Labour leadership contender in a very long time.
Now, there is actually one other option that stops Andy Burnham getting into, getting the chance to stand, which I think is somewhat plausible. Alva Ray is political editor at The New Statesman. She's tweeted this today. Would Keir Starmer stand against Wes Streeting? Yesterday, a Number 10 insider said that is a card the PM could yet play. They said he would win and that the soft left waiting for Burnham would back Starmer. But the soft left are clear that won't happen. There is no way in hell that the soft left would back Keir, a well-placed soft left figure says. Now, if it's in Wes Streeting's interest to have this contest before Andy Burnham comes back into Parliament, it's also in Keir Starmer's interest, because Keir Starmer, if he genuinely wants to stay in the job, if it's Keir Starmer versus Andy Burnham is going to walk it. If it's Keir Starmer versus Wes Streeting, again, in that situation, I probably actually would bet on Wes Streeting, because all the dirt that people have on Wes Streeting also applies to Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer can't stand up and attack Wes Streeting for being too close to Peter Mandelson and Labour together. It wouldn't make any sense, right? And Wes Streeting is a much better communicator than Keir Starmer. So I think Wes Streeting probably would win that. But in a similar situation as before, Keir Starmer's got more hope against Streeting than he does against Burnham. So it might be that Starmer is the person who sort of hurries up this process so that he can try and have a Starmer-Streeting two-way, or even a sort of Starmer-Streeting Rayner freeway, which again is not that easy to call.
Well, what you're describing here, Michael, is people putting their personal interests above the broader interest of both the party and the country. And isn't it fascinating, the people that said country before party are doing the precise opposite? It's almost like they were projecting something, right? They were trying to say something which actually they didn't embody themselves. So yeah, that might happen if we have Starmer versus Streeting, because those men think it's in their personal interest, but then that screws Labour. I mean, that wouldn't be out of keeping with how they've behaved. Look at Keir Starmer, and look, this is something I really want to talk about in the months and years ahead. Keir Starmer was this country's shadow Brexit secretary before the 2019 general election. He pushed the Labour Party to have the most radical position possible on Brexit. He would simply not accept a compromise on Brexit, to the extent that when he met, I believe it was the Chief of Staff for Theresa May...
Gavin Barwell.
Gavin Barwell, not to say Gavin Williamson, not Gavin Williamson, goodness me. Gavin Barwell, they met. Gavin Barwell's written about this. They met. Barwell had a set of conditions that he said we can use as a base of compromise. They were Starmer's conditions, okay? We talked about this on the show years ago with Oliver Eagleton. He basically read back to Starmer what Starmer had said were like my red lines, and Starmer said, we couldn't possibly concede to this. You know, this was somewhere in Whitehall.
So he hadn't told him it was him, right? So Gavin Barwell sort of says to Starmer, look, we've come up with this set of proposals.
Yeah.
Will you agree to them? And Keir Starmer says, we couldn't possibly agree to them. And then Barwell reveals, well, they were written by you.
Yeah. Almost word for word. I think it was almost, Starmer was using words like, we couldn't possibly, this is, ridiculous. So the whole point of Starmer's position on Brexit was spoiling. It was never about a good outcome for the country. It was about destroying Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, particularly his leadership, and it was about elevating himself to the top job. So if Starmer does that again here, and it absolutely kills Labour, don't be surprised because the man has form.
Let's go to a clip from the Commons today. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch had some choice words for the Health Secretary.
NHS England, something the Prime Minister announced 14 months ago. But then I suppose the Health Secretary has been a bit distracted lately, hasn't he? Yeah, hasn't he? Yeah. He's chuntering now. Why don't you just do your job? Do your job. Even worse, Mr. Speaker, is what isn't in the gracious speech. There's no point in him giving me dirty looks. We all know what he's been up to. We all know.
He didn't take that well. This is going to go on for a while. And it could get worse. Like this leadership election, especially if Andy Burnham's not in it, could get really, really dirty. And the Tories are going to have a field day. Reform are going to have a field day. The Greens are going to have a field day. Every single other party leader, the person they fear is Andy Burnham. Right? It depends on how you view Zach Polansky. If Zach Polansky genuinely wants a sort of progressive alliance to keep out reform, then he should want Andy Burnham. If he wants the Greens to get the most possible seats at the next election,
yes,
he should want anyone other.
Yeah.
He should want Wes Streeting, frankly, if he wants to get those seats. Reform and the Tories, clearly. I've heard from people that Nigel Farage is most scared of Andy Burnham. I've heard that from sort of very right-wing people who are close to him. So, the NEC has a choice to make, essentially, don't they? Keir Starmer has a choice to make. The NEC has a choice to make. Do you allow enough time to let the guy into Parliament who actually has the best chance of winning the next general election and keeping out reform? Or do you, if you're sort of a factional right-wing member, try and fix it for Wes Streeting so you retain control of the party? Or if you're Keir Starmer and just your ego is too big, do you try and speed it up so that, it's you versus Streeting, it's right versus right?
Well, recent precedent tells us what's going to happen, Michael, because we literally had Andy Burnham go for this quite recently, and the subcommittee voted against it.
It could all be so much simpler if they just didn't block him.
Yeah.
Could you imagine how much this would be so neat if they just let him stand?
But they're morons. They're avaricious, grasping morons. They're not smart people. It was in their rational self-interest to let Burnham be back in the Labour Party, but they're too stupid to realise that. And you're saying as well about, this will get quite bloody as a leadership debate. People think they know Wes Streeting, right? You think you know who Wes Streeting is, so do I, so do our listeners and our viewers. If he's going for the top job, believe me, a ton of new stuff is going to come out. That's the job of the press. Look at what's happened to Zach Polansky just since he's been leader of the Labour Party, and people think, actually, they can credibly win local authorities and pick up lots of seats. There have been a ton of stories about him, most of it nonsense, almost all of it nonsense, actually. The same thing happens to Streeting. And somebody like Wes Streeting, who's been in the Labour Party for so long, been a factual manipulator for so long, so much crap will come out. So many people will have bad things to say about Wes Streeting. So it will just toxify his brand. And I think we take it for granted. The exact same thing happened with Liz Truss and Sunak, right? And that was disastrous for the Tory party. If you're going to say, when can you pinpoint the moment? Bear in mind, in the 2024 general election, they end up with 24% of the popular vote. Their worst outcome since 1832. You can go back further, actually. But their worst outcome for basically 2 centuries. Where can you pinpoint the moment that would happen? It was that whole leadership contest. People are saying it was Truss, and when she won, and when the markets killed her, and the kamikaze budget. I don't think it was. I think it was that contest, because the whole the whole country is looking at the party of government with these two people hammering each other, loads of crap being thrown at both of them, saying, this isn't normally how government works. I've never seen this in my lifetime before. And that's what killed them. And I do think a contest, whatever the outcome, even if one of them comes out of it really well, smelling of roses, a contest between Starmer and Streeting is a disaster for the Labour Party. I think that's the worst possible outcome.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's go to a good John McDonnell tweet today. He said, just a thought, the sort of the classic understated way John McDonnell does. Just a thought, Wes Streeting owes his political status to the support he's received over the years from Peter Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney at Labour together. He wouldn't make a move against Keir Starmer without Mandelson's say-so. So look on this as Mandelson's and Morgan's revenge. It's kind of troublemaking, isn't it? I mean, I think Wes Streeting probably has known for a very long time that he wants to be Prime Minister and probably doesn't need the say-so of Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney. But I mean, he's so close to them. I mean, I don't know, who knows? Everyone who is around him is close to those people. It's the same, it's sort of, the Venn diagram is a circle of people who are close to Wes Streeting and people who are close to Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney.
Well, what screwed Keir Starmer to some extent is the institutional corruption of the Labour right as an organised faction, right? And those are the exact same people that will be working around Wes Streeting. And Wes Streeting literally can't hire three people who have now been disgraced in public life: Morgan McSweeney, Peter Mandelson, and Matthew Doyle. He literally can't hire those people. But the people he would be hiring would be friends of those people, or they'd be close associates of those people. And I think you'd have similar issues rearing their head. This is a referendum on a whole way of doing politics with the Labour right. And credit to Jonathan Powell. He seems to be the only one who doesn't get himself in acres of trouble constantly. Alistair Campbell as well. This guy's like a magnet for controversy. They seem to really love it. Even going back to Streeting this morning, walking outside Number 10, you can see he really gets off on being like, the guy in the frame, loving it.
I wonder what, because he's wanted to be a politician for so long that he's probably, had it. Because one of the things that they can get on the kind of Corbyns, the Polanskis, is that they haven't wanted to be a political leader their whole life. So you can find sort of stuff that they said that, they just meant. Whereas Wes Streeting, I think, has been playing a long game since he was like a small child, probably.
Well, Owen Jones was tweeting about what he knew about Wes Streeting, and there's going to be so much goss that comes out, Michael. With some great tweets from Owen, saying that we were together, we weren't an item. It's complete nonsense. He's spilling the beans about when they were hanging out in 2010, 2011. There'll be loads of that stuff.
We have a fundraiser live. Novara 3.0 is loading, and we need your help.
We're about to take a huge leap, and we need your help.
Corporate media only cares about protecting elites.
They don't call a genocide what it is.
And they only take on vested interests when they're absolutely forced to.
The next decade will be shaped by whoever wins the media war.
That's why we need to get bigger.
Much bigger. We're reaching an audience of millions.
More than 20 million views on YouTube every month.
2.5 million followers on social media. And we've got 1.2 million subscribers on YouTube.
I'm going to level with you. Just a tiny fraction of that number are paying supporters.
We've achieved so much on a shoestring.
And imagine what we could do if we had twice as many people funding our journalism.
We've got to get bigger and better.
And we need 2,000 people to help us make our most ambitious leap yet.
Much bigger outlets have folded.
But thanks to our regular supporters, we're going from strength to strength.
Small, regular donations are what makes us resilient.
It means our journalism is free for all to access without paywalls, and it keeps us editorially independent.
Build new media for a different politics. Help grow our supporter base by 2,000 people.
Set up a direct debit or use your cards to donate from just £1 per month today.
We can't do this without you.
We've been blown away by the support since we put out that video. So thank you so much if you've become a subscriber this week. If you haven't yet, we have an ambitious target. We want 2,000 new people to sign up to strengthen our supporter base so that we can move into our new studio with strength and vitality. Aaron, you look like you're gagging to say something. Well, you're not.
I always am with us, Michael. We had a lovely super chat from Susie Moffat. 9877. Sorry, Susie. We had a bit of a technical problem with regards to getting the super chat up, but it was so nice, I thought I'd read it out. £9.99 from Susie. Forgive me the self-indulgent super chat this once. Just up my monthly donation from thank you for £3 a month, to £16.
Oh.
Finally got a new job, so wanted to share the love. Keep up the amazing work. Keep us all sane, or keeping us all sane. That means a lot, Susie. You know, I often say this. I give my cash to, of course, Novara Media, but also RSPB. Keep frustrating those land developers. That upsets Michael with his YIMBYism. And of course, the National Trust, the woke National Trust, the radical.
I think you can.
Trust.
I think you can have like Swift bricks in houses that you can still build the house. You just have a brick that they can nest in. I'm sure there is some way that
they'd lobbied for this.
The
but
and
then,
the RSPB could come to.
They'd lobbied for that.
Natural England would probably have to get rid of.
No, that's not happening now because of the Labour YIMBYs. But regardless, it's lovely to read that, and whether it's £1 or £2 or £3 a month, it's really appreciated. Nobody else is going to do it for us.
Also, congratulations on your new job.
Congratulations on your new job. That's great, and it's good to it's good to share. It's good to share when you're doing well. It's great to share. Best feeling in the world.
If any of the rest of you have good news, feel free to share your good news with us. And also, if the good news is financial, that's all the more reason to go to novaramedia.com/support. Be like Susie. The crisis in Starmer's leadership means Britain once again finds itself in a political crisis, and the markets are noticing.
Political turmoil on 10 Downing Street spilling over to the bond markets over renewed concerns about UK's finances.
You said 30-year government bonds at 5.7%. They actually went up above 5.8%, fell back a little bit, but it's not good. If you want to borrow money, if you want to credibly invest for the long term, you'd like to do that at as low a rate as possible on the international market.
And it started to kind of gradually go up a little bit. But the thing that's really triggered it, kind of got it, spiked it up higher, is all this leadership speculation about Keir Starmer. We'll come back to why that matters in just a moment. But of course, the Prime Minister came out and said, look, I'm staying. And you can see the line stopped kind of going up. It kind of settled somewhat. But it settled at a pretty high rate.
Yes, traders of government debt fear that if Starmer is forced out of Downing Street, he will be replaced by someone who will borrow more and spend more. And therefore, they are increasing the interest they charge when they lend to the government. On Tuesday, government long-term borrowing costs hit their highest levels since 1998. So that was on 30-year bonds. For 10-year bonds, rates hit their highest since 2008. So that's since the global financial crisis. Borrowing costs undoubtedly do matter. The government is expected to spend £111 billion this year on interest repayments. And obviously, the higher the interest rates go, the higher that figure will be. And this does have a disciplining effect on government. So this was from a Financial Times piece today. So they wrote, in a weird way, the bond market has become Starmer's most powerful ally. Each time gilts sell off a little in response to a ministerial resignation, the market gives the Labour Party an unpleasant taste of life without him. In effect, the bond market is playing a role the parliamentary party will not, enforcer of fiscal discipline. The Financial Times on Tuesday also ran an article suggesting that even if Starmer goes, Rachel Reeves could stay on as Chancellor. So they printed this quote from an ally of Rachel Reeves. They said, if I was an incoming Prime Minister or candidate launching a bid, then I'd want to take the threat of market instability off the table. Having Rachel is a good way of doing that. Now, the reason this is making me giggle is because when it says an ally of Rachel Reeves said, that often means that it was written by Rachel Reeves, who then gets someone else to send it. So if I was a prime, I think I would probably keep her in the job. Why not? That's definitely not going to happen, in my view. She's overwhelmingly unpopular with the public. If you want a fresh start, the last thing you do is keep a really unpopular person there. I think the markets find her somewhat reassuring because they don't think she's going to do anything wild, but I also don't think they're particularly impressed with her. This prognosis from The Economist Wall Street editor, to me, seemed more plausible. Right? So he said this, when you step back, it is really fun that there's going to be a protracted Labour leadership contest with lots of infighting, after which any soft left winner will get bond market revolted into returning to the Starmer programme straight away. Now, I don't necessarily think that's the case.
This is such bullshit,
go
Michael,
on,
man. This is just economist NPC nonsense. By the standards of British politics, Starmer is soft left. Like a PM who was renationalising rail, who was investing that amount of money into the NHS, who was increasing taxes on non-doms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That same dude 2 years ago would call Starmer soft left and would say that he shouldn't be in power because that might upset the bond markets, or that kind of agenda will upset the bond markets. They just move the goalposts constantly. I'm fed up of it.
I don't necessarily think he's right there, but I think probably it is the case. I mean, it is the case.
Starmer has a soft left agenda for many policy areas, not all, but the big things that Burnham would change would be Israel. It would be not having people like Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to this country. But it'd be how he does politics would be the thing that changes.
But that's not what he's saying. I mean, obviously, sort of the pitch that Andy Burnham is making isn't, I'm just going to be different on Israel and everything else is going to be the same.
Made his pitch,
all his supporters are saying this has to be a much more ambitious program. We do need to spend more money. They often say we'll do a wealth tax and make the money back, but that's not necessarily always going to pay for all the spending. I think it is the case that Andy Burnham is putting forward a more left-wing pitch than Keir Starmer. Now, there are lots of people who are saying that he can do this in a very smart way, which gets the markets on side. I mean, our interview sort of goes into that. But I mean, I don't think Starmer has been very small c conservative in government.
No, they've scrapped the two-child benefit cap. What now? So now he's on the Labour right, according to this dude at The Economist magazine. He scrapped the two-child benefit cap. They've nationalised rail. They've increased tax, like I said, on some of the ultra-rich. They've increased funding to the NHS. They've given a ton of money to striking workers in rail and elsewhere, junior doctors. If Jeremy Corbyn did all that as Prime Minister, this same guy would be saying it's Stalinism.
I mean, you're making a lot of assumptions about this guy. He's written a very good book, by the way, actually, on the land trap. You'd like the book.
No, I'm tired of these people. I'm tired of them. It's all vibes.
I'm a bit confused about your argument now because you're saying Keir Starmer actually is really left. So your only problem with him is that he doesn't do politics, is Israel and Mandelson. You think everything else should stay the same?
There are clear elements of Starmer in government which I think are coded as soft left. Absolutely. Of course there are. Not all of them. Some of them.
But I mean, Miliband and Burnham are both going to be standing to his left. I mean, they're explicitly saying it. All the outriders are explicitly saying the Labour Party needs to remember its roots and become more left-wing. That's what Angela Rayner is very explicitly saying.
Large parts of Starmer's agenda are the most left-wing of any Prime Minister in my lifetime.
But Rayner is saying she wants the party to move to the left. Now, I'm not saying that's a problem.
They all talk crap, don't they?
So Rayner's also talking crap.
Well, yeah.
So everyone's talking crap.
No, I'm saying this guy's a journalist talking rubbish, and Rayner is somebody who I don't necessarily rate as an elite-tier politician. She's a crusading minister, I think. In terms of where Starmer's gone really badly wrong, yes, it's literally how he does politics. His voice, for one thing, he sounds awful. The way that he's exercised political control within the Labour Party, the way he's not tried to build a broad coalition, particularly on Gaza, literally cheering on war crimes at the start of that, the way he treated Jeremy Corbyn, you can go on and on and on. So I do think a large part of Starmer's problems are, yes, the duplicitous nature of how he does politics. That's not the whole problem. I'm not somebody saying that, Starmer's policy program is fantastic. You yourself would have said that Starmer has a soft left sort of political economic program a few months ago. And now this guy's saying, look.
But you're obsessing over this word soft left. I mean, it's just specifically the case that the people who are standing against Keir Starmer, other than Ed Miliband, are explicitly saying they want to have a more left-wing agenda than Starmer and Reeves have had. Now, if you're Andy Burnham, the argument you're making is you can have a a progressive agenda which is not fiscally profligate.
Literally none of them have set up their stall yet. Literally none of them. This hasn't started yet.
Angela Rayner has literally spoke to the CWU where she said that the Labour Party needs to get back to its roots and start being Labour again and be more left-wing.
What doesn't mean necessarily spending money?
Yeah, but he's just saying that the next leader might well be someone who pitches themselves to the left of Keir Starmer and then is limited in what they can do because of the bond markets. It just doesn't seem that controversial to me.
I just think it's just Economist magazine NPC pseudo-think. Sorry.
Well, I think that's a bit of a...
It is. He's just saying cliches and platitudes.
How many times have you critiqued Rachel Reeves' fiscal rule, right?
I think that's bad. Yeah, that's the one thing I would change. That's not increasing tax,
but that's exactly the kind of thing that the markets are going to care about, right? I'm not saying... I think we should do it. But I think if Andy Burnham says we're going to change the fiscal rule, which I think he should do, right, then the markets are going to have a response and he's going to have to make a choice. Now, the idea that if they shift the fiscal rule, that's not moving to the left because Starmer and Reeves are already quite left other than they do politics in a different way. It just seems like a bizarre point.
First of all, why is that left-wing? Why is it, if you said we're going to move the fiscal rules this way, why is that left wing? There are many politicians on the right, not least Ronald Reagan and literally Margaret Thatcher, who ran massive deficits to increase growth. So you could have a right wing political agenda. That's what Truss tried to do, right? We'll have higher deficits to fund tax cuts, and the growth will make up for the issue. And in the long term, actually, it will bring more taxes to the exchequer. And, it's a net positive for bondholders. And we'll have, a bigger economy. So don't worry. So the idea that, for instance, changing those rules around budget responsibility, etc. So what percentage of GDP should government borrowing get to and the debt get to? Again, that's not a left-wing thing. This is nonsense.
But you're just obsessing over this one word, soft left. I mean, it is very clearly the case that all of the candidates, other than Wes Streeting, have pitched themselves as saying, we are going to be more imaginative and ambitious when it comes to economic policy, and that might involve borrowing lots more money than was done before.
I think they'll say, when the contest happens, if it happens, and I hope it happens with a wide range of people, right? I personally hope that you have Streeting, you have Rain, you have Burnham, and you have Starmer. That'd be fabulous, right? I think it'd be great. They'll set up a range of stalls. I think in their heart of hearts, most of them think that Labour's big problem is Keir Starmer. In their heart of hearts, they might change this or that policy, and I hope they do. I hope, for instance, that Burnham changes foreign policy. But in their heart of hearts, they think the big problem is Starmer. They do, and I think that's correct.
Yeah, but I mean, I do and I don't.
They've reversed on the winter fuel
allowance. I think
allowance.
that people like Ed Miliband are really suggesting that Keir Starmer has missed an opportunity. He wants to go into the chancellorship and change policy and be much more ambitious. Like that's the position being put forward by his outriders. I think the idea that Ed Miliband just wants to go and do exactly the same thing that was happening before, but without Keir Starmer, I don't think that's true.
We're talking at cross purposes. Basically, I think you've cited a guy at The Economist who spent 15 minutes talking about it, who I just think is talking in cliches, and I don't think it's politically useful, actually.
You've read one sentence from the guy.
Keir Starmer's agenda, by the standards of British politics, on many policy issues over the last 45 years, is indisputably centre-left, soft left. He's saying, well, actually, if somebody else comes in, we'll move away from that and they'll be punished and we'll go back to Starmerism. Somehow Starmerism is now what, centre-right?
I mean, Starmerism, you always come on this show and say they're a great centre-right party.
No, I'm joking.
You say that about the Labour Party
I say it as a wind-up. No, but on particular policy...
You're shifting your position because you've lashed out at one person's tweet.
No. On particular policy... No, but public ownership of rail. It's a centre-left policy. Now, how it's being implemented, some issues are quite bad, right? For instance, they're changing the pension deals of rail workers that are affected by bringing it back into public ownership. I'm not saying it's perfect, but the principle of public ownership of rail, that's a centre-left thing. Yeah.
Do you think the Labour Party should go to the left, or do you think they're already just soft left and it's fine?
I think the most damaging right-wing things that have happened under Starmer, he reversed. So, for instance, what we saw on the winter fuel allowance, he reversed, but the political damage is still there, right? He reversed. So do I think they should go left or right? I think they should change the rules, totally.
What do you mean the rules?
Spending rules.
Spending rules,
yeah.
Okay.
In terms of, fiscal...
But you don't think that's going to be a risk when it comes to the bond markets? So if you change the spending rules...
First of all, they've changed the rules, actually. They did change the ruals at the start of this with Rachel Reeves, but it was quite a smart thing to do. You could say, look, at the moment, we're going to go to 105% of GDP. We're going to make it 115% of GDP. Okay. Whatever. You're probably...
Well, I mean, we'll see if the market's like that. I mean, it doesn't seem to me a completely sort of stupid question that they might not. Anyway, we've got an interview on this. Right. Some left-wing MPs have pushed back against the narrative that you have to pay attention to the bond markets. Paula Barker is MP for Liverpool Wavertree.
You've heard the argument that Andy Burnham, and the same has been said maybe more strongly about someone like Angela Rayner, that they would spook the markets, that they wouldn't be quite as tough on spending, on borrowing, and the markets would punish, the government would punish all of us if that was the way forward. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that it's time for us to start listening to the country more than we listen to the markets. I think, the markets will have to fall in line.
Barker got a lot of flack for those statements from some financial commentators, the kind of people that Aaron Bastani absolutely hates. Diane Abbott, though, made a similar point on Sky.
I want there to be a properly organised selection process, and we'll see who emerges.
And that will take weeks and weeks. And meanwhile, the bond markets will go into a, hissy fit.
British politics and British Parliament can't be run, at the behest of the bond markets. We have to do what's right. We have to do what's right, and we have to choose the right person to be leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister, and we have to do it as quickly as possible, but we have to do it properly.
Well, we're all going to be pretty poor if we don't pay heed to the markets, though, aren't we?
No, come on. I mean, if the British government is going to be completely dominated by the bond market, MPs might as well go home.
So does the Labour leadership election risk a financial crisis? It's important to note the moves we've seen in the past couple of days have been tiny, right? They've not been dramatic at all. If you look here at a graph from the BBC, the big hikes to borrowing costs have all been for different reasons. So in 2022, that was largely because of post-COVID inflation and the Ukraine war. It did spike a bit after the Liz Truss budget, but you can see that that's basically sort of geopolitical phenomena. Starmer becomes prime minister, nothing really changes. There has been a very big spike recently, but that's because of US and Israel going to war with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. So I think it's gone up sort of 0.1% or something because of this crisis. It went up a whole percent because of that war. So the idea that sort of these tiny little differences make sort of a huge difference to the future of the country is a little bit far-fetched. So we don't need to panic. However, that doesn't necessarily mean the next Labour leader can just ignore the bond markets altogether. I spoke earlier today to Joe Michell, Professor of Economics at the University of the West of England.
The day-to-day sort of breathless reporting out of Westminster recently has been about, minute movements in bond interest rates, bond yields, as they're called, compared to bigger moves, which we've seen as a result of the war in the Middle East. But we do face a long-run difficult situation in that interest rates are a lot higher than they were, and that's mostly the result of central banks raising interest rates following the pandemic, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the inflation that came from that. So interest rates went up from close to zero in the pandemic up to sort of 5% kind of levels over a very short period of time. And given that the stock of government debt that we've got went up after 2008, it went up again during the pandemic, all for good reasons, and it did exactly what it should do. The government stepped in and, was the ultimate insurance policy for the rest of the country in those crisis situations. But it does mean we're in a difficult situation. And it is going to be difficult for any incoming Labour leader. We've seen lots of, I think, quite silly commentary the last few days saying, who would the bond markets prefer? Do they like Wes Streeting because he's market friendly? Or are they worried about Andy Burnham or Ed Miliband or Rayner because they're seen as left wing? And I think we should just ignore all this. It really is, it is noise. But there is an issue that they will face, and that is how to square this circle of a high share of tax going on interest payments and the fact that we can't do government spending cuts. We cannot go back to austerity. We've pushed that absolutely as close to the bone as it can be, and we're living with the consequences. And so ultimately taxation, I think, is the lever that has to be pulled. But there's also, I think, a lot to be done in terms of reforming our institutional structure, thinking about the relationship between the Treasury, the Bank of England, the Debt Management Office. The fiscal rules are broken. Many people agree with that now, right across the political spectrum. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, Institute for Government, openly say the fiscal rules are broken. There's a range of views about what to do about that. I would move to something much more judgment-based, fiscal standards, longer timeframes. I would move judgment from the OBR about pass-fail type situations back to the Treasury. You could leave the OBR producing forecasts, but say the Treasury then decides whether it thinks its actions are sufficient to hit its own targets. And those targets, as I say, should be kind of seen as looser standards rather than this very narrow, we've got headroom of 7 billion, or we haven't, we've got a black hole, or this kind of ridiculous media hype that we see around budgets based on wildly unstable, unpredictable, volatile forecasts, self-imposed fiscal rules. The difference between these two things 5 years in the future, which is never going to happen, then becomes what everybody focuses on. And we see repeatedly chancellors scrambling, looking for cuts, looking for tax rises, doing it in the stupidest possible way, short-run thinking, overriding everything else. So we've got to move away from that. We do have the power of the Bank of England. Having said you've got to be careful, I do think there's a role in a situation exactly like the one we're going to face soon, as the fallout from the Iran war starts to really be felt. I think you have to have coordination between the Bank of England and the Treasury. The Treasury has to do enough that the Bank of England doesn't feel compelled to raise interest rates, because that'll make things worse under the circumstances. And the Bank of England ultimately has to make sure the Treasury can issue debt, can get the bond auctions away if it needs to, under pressure in an emergency situation. So, there's an institutional piece of the puzzle there, and getting the sequencing right would be very important there because the markets will be watching, they will be jittery, and so you've got to simultaneously say reassuring things while I think making potentially some quite radical changes. And then longer term, ultimately tax is the lever that has to be pulled if we want to have a state big enough to perform the functions it needs to perform and end austerity finally after 15 years.
I mean, isn't your answer there, though, precisely why, the markets or bond traders say they're concerned? Because you're saying the only real solution is to raise taxes, but no one is really able to raise taxes. So you'll have people on the left who I think quite rightly say, let's have a wealth tax. But most people argue that unless you are sort of targeting the middle class as well with that wealth tax, it's not going to raise very much money. I don't think any of the challengers to Keir Starmer have said, let's put 2p on income tax, for example. So it is unclear how it's going to be politically possible for anyone to raise taxes. And that does mean that we are sort of politically in a bind. And those bond traders who say that Britain is kind of screwed, sort of increased deficits and prolonged inflation are now built into the system. Are they not just correct?
They're not correct, but you're putting your finger right on the issue, I think. And a lot of the problems that we're currently facing, I think, would go away quite quickly if somebody would just say, we're going to put 2 percentage points on income tax. Now, obviously, other problems then arise from that in terms of income distribution. Is that the way you want to do it, 2% on the basic rate? I don't think so. You want to have it targeted at least partly further up the distribution. But I do think a lot of the problems that we're seeing would go away if there was the political will to make that kind of choice. I mean, if Starmer and Reeves had done something reasonably punchy on taxation and reforming the tax system as well, because our tax system is mad. It's full of all kinds of cliff edges where rates suddenly change. Capital income on shareholding is taxed at a lower rate than income on work. National insurance actually favors those on higher income. No reason to have national insurance. It's not doing anything different. It's just income tax with a different name and a different set of thresholds. So I think if somebody said, look, we've got a stonking majority, we're a left-wing government, we're going to pay for the state through fairly, we're going to reform the tax system, I actually think the bond markets would probably take a look at that person and say, that's the one. And it could be somebody on the left. Even if the overall share of GDP and tax went up, I actually think you'd get support quite a long way across the spectrum, into the centre and even the centre-right, if you were doing a sensible reform of the tax system. As I say, even if the overall share in GDP went up. So I actually think, a left-wing sort of challenger to Starmer could actually put themselves in quite a strong position by really, grabbing the nettle. But it could be quite unpopular on the left. I mean, quite a lot of people on the left are of the view that it should only be wealth taxes on people with £1 million or more in assets, and everybody else should be untouched. And unfortunately, I don't think that is realistic.
Joe Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on Novara Media. So that was Joe Michelle saying that a left-wing leader can get the bond markets on side so long as they are willing to basically do broad-based taxes. Yeah. Do you agree?
Totally agree. Totally agree. If I was Prime Minister, Michael, I think I'd be cooed in a day. I wouldn't last as long as Keir Starmer. I think that we need to bring down the tax threshold in this country. It's presently, 12.5 grand. I think you start paying income tax. In Sweden, of course, they have krona, but in Sweden, I think it's about 3,000 euro you start paying tax. I'd like to see something similar. Not huge amounts, obviously, because you're not particularly well off, but I feel like the mechanism of social democratic politics is you contribute, right? If you can contribute, you should contribute. And the wealthy should contribute more, but you should still contribute something really as soon as you're in work. Like I say, not much. So I would basically bring the threshold at which you start paying tax down. I'd probably move the tax bands around a little bit. I think right now, for instance, a family with 2 reasonably decent income earners with 2 kids that need childcare, who both have student loans, actually have a lot less money coming in than you might think, because they lose out on certain benefits and whatnot. So I would do that, but then I would also bring in, equalised capital gains tax with dividends tax. I'd probably have a wealth tax, so it's very broad. And that's going to allow you to pay for loads of stuff, right? Which is what we need to do. I'd also stop lots of spending. Trident across the entire life cycle of that project is going to cost about £200 billion. I mean, sadly, we've spent a lot of it already. We don't need it. We're presently putting nuclear sort of weapons onto F-35s so that we have a 2-pronged nuclear deterrent, right? This is something that Starmer's doing. There are different kind of F-35s. One of them you can put nuclear weapons on. That's going to cost about $1 billion for us to do. And I'm seeing that deal and I'm thinking, well, hold on. So you're telling me we could have spent $1 billion on having a nuclear deterrent on a fighter jet rather than having Trident. And Trident is the gold standard. I know all the arguments, regardless. But rather than spend $1 billion here, we spent $200 billion over here on Trident. We can't afford Trident. Equally, actually, we can't afford the F-35s. That's a £70 billion project over its life cycle. But we could have had a fighter jet that delivered those kinds of weapons like we did before the end of the Cold War. That's what Britain used to have. So we're spending money, for instance, on defence procurement, which we don't have. And I think we can make massive cuts as well. So the idea that the left can't do cuts, believe me, we can do cuts, but they have to be in the right places. I think the left should increase tax across the board and not just on the ultra-rich. And you see it with Mamdani, right? Mamdani, I think, 2 days ago, the news came out that he's gotten rid of the municipal deficit for New York. Great, why not? Mao was big on frugality, Michael. He said,
I think that was partly from getting extra money from the state.
Sure, but he could have spent it, right? Yeah. The point is that he wants to balance a budget. And this idea that, well, it's centre-right coded to want to balance a budget is not really true. Mao said that the path to Chinese modernization ran through frugality. There's no reason why that can't be a left-wing value. And when you see all the money that's being wasted on outsourcing, the rentierism in outsourcing, for instance, housing benefit rather than spending it on council housing and whatnot, there's a lot of waste there. So again, socialists should be against waste. We've allowed the centre-right to occupy too much of that territory.
I agree. Let's wrap up there. Aaron Bastani, pleasure to be joined by you this evening.
Yeah, looking at some of the comments, people think we're fighting. We're not fighting. As I said, Michael, quoting Stalin in Pravda before he went crazy, the only place that people all agree is in the cemetery.
Yeah.
It's good to disagree.
Let's wrap up. Thank you all for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another, I'm sure, blockbuster live stream from 6 p.m. It might be the case that there is a leadership election by then. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.